Now we're going to go over the most relevant one to the real world, the relevant scenario, which is case 3. This is the scenario of the M&M model where taxes exist and it is possible for a company to go bankrupt. So it's of the three, it's really the only one that applies to the real world. And we're going to calculate, again, what's the optimal capital structure for a company if they want to maximize their value and if they want to minimize their cost of capital. So in this case, let's look at value first, proposition 1. Uh, Adding debt is going to increase value of a company initially. Okay, so if you start with a company that has no debt whatsoever and you start adding debt, the value increases for 2 reasons. One is because there's a tax savings on interest, so there's the tax shield that we talked about in case 2. And second is because of leverage, which I talked about at the EBIT break-even videos. When you add debt to a profitable company, the value increases. Okay, now eventually, what's going to happen is you're going to have such a high level of debt that the bankruptcy risk will arise. Okay, so you'll be in a scenario where at 0% of debt, you got some benefits, you kept adding 10, 15, and then when you got to a very high number, people start thinking the company might go bankrupt and the value decreases. Okay, so I'm going to draw that out on a chart here and pictorially the same way that we did for the other 2 cases. The first one is the proposition 1, the value on the vertical axis and the level of debt on the horizontal axis. And you'll see that it's going to be a chart that shows a maximum value at a certain point. So at a 0 level of debt, the value of the company is going to be VU, which is the unlevered value. And then it continues to increase because of the reasons we talked about above, that you're going to have a scenario where tax savings and leverage will add to the value of the company. And then it hits this optimal debt to equity ratio. After that point, the bankruptcy risk starts to creep up. So you want to be at the optimal debt to equity ratio because that's where the value is maximized. And anything to the left of that, increasing debt actually still is continuing to increase the value of the company because of those 2 reasons that we talked about. And anything to the right of the optimal point is going to be a scenario where bankruptcy risk is going to start decreasing the value of the company. And unfortunately, there's no formula for this, and this is specific to each company, so we can't say that the optimal level is 65% debt or something like that. It's going to be a variable. Now, let's do the same thing, proposition 2, same case. What happens to the cost of capital when the company, again, has no debt and you start adding debt? The cost of capital goes down because debt is cheaper than equity, the cost of debt. And it becomes further cheaper when you take the deduction on it, the tax deduction, because equity is not deductible. But when we hit a certain point, again, adding so much debt introduces the risk of bankruptcy, and that'll make the cost of debt go up and the cost of equity. Primarily equity. People don't want to invest in a company that is likely to go bankrupt. So the cost of capital starts going up after that point. And what you're going to see is if we draw this out, then eventually the optimal debt to equity ratio for a company has to be the same for proposition 1 and 2. So the debt to equity ratio that maximizes the value of the firm is also going to be the same debt to equity ratio that minimizes the cost of capital of the firm. So the chart is sort of an inverse. When you start with no debt, your cost of capital is your cost of unlevered equity because you have no debt. As you add debt, you continue to lower your cost of capital, which is the first portion that we talked about, until you hit your optimal debt to equity ratio and some bankruptcy concerns start to pop up. And then, just like above, any increase at that point is going to start to increase your cost of capital due to the fact that the risk has gone up. Okay, so the risk has gone up both on your cost of equity and your cost of debt. So the conclusion in this case is case 1 was it wasn't relevant. Case 2 was you maximize debt. In this case, it says that there is an optimal debt to equity ratio for each firm. Okay? And it's going to be different. It's not going to be one ratio for everybody. And there's no formula for it either, at least nothing simple, straightforward like there was in case 2. And at this optimal debt to equity ratio, the capital structure for a company, that's going to occur at the same point that the value of the firm is maximized and the weighted average cost of capital for the firm is minimized.